The main part of my talk will be focused on how to create, convert, and retain leads, but I have some bonus slides at the end on to reply form nudges. First, I'd like to start with a reminder of the current fundraising situation, and I'm not sure we need it though. So this is the reality, regardless of channel or even continent. Supporters, as they come in, they drop off, and how we're trying to fix this is by putting more donors in, even though we know that they're gonna fall off eventually. Now, I mentioned in the beginning, in the introduction, that the science of philanthropy has recognized 3 key factors that explain giving. The first was emotions, and we've already seen how emotional stories could increase giving compared to facts and other kind of information. And also Larissa's talk is gonna share some facts around empathy. But the emotion of the appeal plays a much smaller role in the initial decision to donate, not the amount, just the decision to help or not, compared to the supporter's goals. That has a much bigger influence on the initial decision to help or not. So the supporter goals could be twofold. One has to do with the perceived impact that I feel I can have, and we talked about perceived impact a lot in this symposium, and my talk is going to focus on the second part, supporter identity. Now, what is the supporter identity? Each one of us has many different identities, and some we're born with, like our race or our gender. Some we choose, like our profession or the decision to become a parent, and some are imposed on us, whether we are a cancer survivor or not. But the important thing to remember is that each identity is associated with values and goals that determine our behavior. For example, as fundraisers, we want to be good at our job, so we read books, we attend conferences, we do testing. But not all of our identities are active at the same time. Right now, your fundraiser identity is active, and that's why you participate here, you take notes, you ask questions. But after this, if you go to the supermarket, for example, to do your shopping, your identity as a parent might be activated because you want to buy things for your kids, and that will influence your buying decisions. So different contexts, different identities might be active, and that might affect our behavior. Why is this relevant to fundraising? It's relevant because that's what brings people to you. They support you not because you asked, but because of who they are or aspire to be. And the supporter identity will be, of course, different from organization to organization, and here are some examples of it. So for example, religious people will support an organization that shares that belief, or people with a personal experience with a disease or a situation, even like homelessness, might support a charity that tries to help that cause, and so on. Unfortunately, discovering your supporters' identities is not as simple as asking people, why do you support me? We all know that the most likely answer is because you asked. So there is a science behind uncovering and validating your supporters' identities, but this session isn't about that. I'm happy to discuss all this outside the symposium, but for now, I'd like to demonstrate why it's important to discover your supporters' identities. Assuming you know them, you could make who you are as an organization synonymous in their mind with who they are. And by doing that, you'll increase engagement and giving. And in the next few slides, I'm going to share some case studies where we did that in an online environment. The first case study is with the MakeAWish Foundation. And what we did is we took their control Facebook ad and we just added some copy to it that emphasizes the medical professional identity. So we added one sentence saying, as a medical professional, you know the heartache of a child diagnosed with a critical illness. And looking at click-through rates, we saw a 41% increase in engagement. And that's because we not only emphasized the medical professional identity, but we also used a Facebook feature to target medical professionals. So we were priming an identity that was existing in that population. The next case study was with a UK client where we first, in this case, we have done some primary research and we had identified and validated the identities. And we found that there was a group of people with heightened sense of responsibility towards homeless people. That was a charity helping homeless people. And we called that identity with heightened sense of responsibility, helper identity. And next, we wanted to test it in the field. So again, we took we created a Facebook ad with their standard copy, focusing around emotion and impact. You could help someone leave homelessness behind for good. And we compared that against the same ad with the only addition of a label, become a homeless helper today. We haven't done anything other than using that word to trigger that feeling of responsibility. And in addition to that, we had a version that elaborated a little bit more into that helper identity. It was the sentence, if it's important to you to help troubled people with their problems, please become a homeless helper today. And this copy, we didn't just make it up. It was one of the items in the validated scale that measured that identity. Now, looking at click-through rates, just by using the helper label, we saw a 350% increase in click-through rates. And by elaborating a little bit more into the identity, we saw a further increase. We did the same with Facebook ads for a religious organization in the US. The control ad was a mix of emotional message, you can help Svetlana find food, and religious message, you bless God's people. And against that, we tested an ad that was focusing just on emotion. So it was only focusing on helping Svetlana find food, and an ad that was focusing only on the religious identity. As an evangelical Christian, you believe Jews should return to Israel to fulfill biblical prophecy. Your gift today can help Svetlana do just that. So we are connecting the religious beliefs to the person themselves. We're not just generically showing that we are a religious organization. We remind people that they are too. And looking at click-through rates, we saw an 18% increase using just an emotional ad, and we saw a 53% increase compared to the control with the identity-based message. For another client, we wanted to test how an identity-focused message would perform against their traditionally very strong premium offer. And in this case, we had two identities. The first one was being a conservationist. So we created an ad that speaks to its values. As a conservationist, you know how important the wetlands are, help our shared ecosystem, and so forth. Looking at the performance, you can see that they performed as well. And this is huge because premiums offers are very successful and very hard to beat, but they also bring in donors that have very low intrinsic motivation to support the cause. Basically, they're people who are there for the premium, and they will usually only give again if there is another premium. But now there is evidence that you could move away from this vicious circle by acquiring supporters, by priming their identity. Right, I said we had two identities for this client. The second one was a hunter identity. So we created this ad that has messages around them being hunter, have hunter friends, and their knowledge. And in this case, because the charity had the material to do so, we also created a value exchange ad where we told them that we're offering hunting tips. And looking at engagement in this case, once again, the identity-based ad performed similarly to the premium ad, proving that this might be a successful way to acquire new donors without relying on premiums. And looking at the value exchange ad, not surprisingly, we had the highest conversion since we're not asking for money. And at this low cost per acquisition, per lead rather, it might be an attractive strategy to bring more people in, and because also there is evidence that the best time to convert people is right after you offered them something. And in this case, we're offering some tips, they receive them, that might be the best time to ask them to give or convert to membership. Okay, so we've seen evidence that identity can improve lead generation or donor acquisition. What happens afterwards? How can we increase their conversion to donors, their repeat donations, or their retention? Now, that's where emotion comes in again, but this time as feedback, as a feedback mechanism. Every time, even in our day-to-day lives, but when we give to charity and after we make a donation or we engage in some way, what we think is, was this a bad or good decision? Was I pressured to do this? Does it make me feel guilty? Does it make me feel good about who I am? And if they are supporting you for a while, some other things are going to be evaluated. Does this charity know me? Am I satisfied with the material that I received? Do they express who I am? And any negative feelings from this evaluation or any negative emotions that come up means that these people will not repeat that behavior. So leads are not going to give, donors are not going to give again. On the contrary, if the evaluation is positive and all the emotions they feel afterwards are positive, that would increase retention and repeat donations. Now, all these evaluations and the generated emotions have to do with who the supporters are mainly. And if we knew who they are, we could positively reinforce their identity with relevant copy and offers and increase conversion and retention. Now, let's see how we can do that. This is a case study after we worked with a UK conservation charity to discover the supporter identities. We found that they had two types of donor identities. One was a bird enthusiast and the other a nature enthusiast. So now we wanted to see if we could improve conversion to membership by tailoring the ask to their identity. So we adapted the telemarketing script of an inbound call after a general lead generation activity where people would raise their hand, call in to get an activity pack, and the conversation started. So, but all we did in the test script was we added the identity questions up front. Are you a bird enthusiast or nature enthusiast? And depending on the answer, we adapted the rest of the script. So now when it was time for us to explain the benefits of the membership, like you will go to the reserves, for example, we frame that around their identity. You will go to the reserves to watch birds, or you can go to the reserves to admire and enjoy nature. And when we were talking about the impact on the cause, also we framed it around their identity. Your donation is going to help birds, or your donation is going to help nature in general. Just by doing that, we saw a lift in conversion by 15% and an increase in donor value by £10. From a different client, this is data showing value and retention based on identity. This is a health charity, and people could have a direct connection to the charity itself by being beneficiaries, or an indirect connection to the charity. Someone in their family was beneficiaries, or direct to the cause they had experience with the disease, or no connection at all. And you can see that when there is a direct connection to either the charity or the cause, the value of the supporter is higher. And when there is any kind of connection at all, either with the charity or the cause, retention is higher. And this is even before we did anything to reinforce this identity. This was, we captured the identity as they became monthly supporters, and we just watched what they did for 5 months. And we saw a difference in value and retention rate. But there is opportunity to further increase value and retention rate by creating tailored journeys for these different identities and giving copy and offers that will match it. And that's what we did with the UK conservation charity that I was talking to you about before. In addition to asking people if they are bird enthusiasts or nature enthusiasts, we also asked them how they prefer to express that identity. Do you like to go outdoors, or do you like to stay indoors and watch documentaries? Do you like to involve your kids, or this is your time alone? Have you taken any action to help birds or nature in the last year? So after we gathered all this insight, we created journeys based on the combination of that. And the slide will become busy, but I'll break it down. This is a screenshot of our journey mapping tool. Each column represents a different month, and each row represents a different combination of the donor insights. Each colored box is a different touch point in a different channel. So blue is direct mail, red is magazine, green is email. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that there isn't much difference. The journeys look pretty similar, and that's good. We don't want to kill ourselves and create 15 different journeys for each identity combination. But the crucial thing is that even though the touch points are the same, the copy changes to reflect and match the identity of the person. So there are copy variants that reinforce who these supporters are. And in addition to that, because we now knew their identity and how they like to express it, we were better at choosing the relevant offers for each identity segment. So for example, people who want to involve their kids now receive the kids magazine and not the adult version, Nature's Home. Or people who like to go outdoors were invited to participate in an activity called Big Wild Sleep Out. While for people that like to stay indoors, there was nothing there before. But now that we knew their interests, we could brainstorm and come up with an activity that will reflect what they like. So we came up with this summer garden watch. And for people who take an action, we had a campaigning ask. By doing all this, we noticed an increase in the commitment to saving nature, so an increase in the commitment to the cause, but we also saw an increase in commitment towards the organization itself. Higher proportion of members retained, there was a higher spend on trade products, and the average value of donations was higher in the pilot group. Right, so if we knew this, we could tailor, create journeys, and increase engagement, value, commitment. But right now, this is how our CRM looks for the most part. 100% unknown on identity. And this is how it should look. This is from the health charity that I shared the retention data before. So what we want to try and do from this moment on, after we discover our supporters' identities, is reduce the amount of unknown that exists in our CRM. Because if we don't, instead of treating them differently as they deserve, we treat them all the same. So you need to capture identity. And how can you do that? Well, after the Insights project where you discover them, which will give you the identity question, you just need to ask that question at every point. And going back to my Facebook ad example, so let's say we start with this Facebook ad. As an eye professional, you've seen challenges people with siloed face firsthand. This is an identity-based ad. If people click to sign up, we ask them for their information, but we also have two questions. Which of the following best describes you? As you or someone close has been using our services, has been affected by sight loss, you know someone, none of the above. And the second question, does your work relate to sight loss? Now you'll notice that even though the ad was identity-based, we didn't rely on that to assume what the identity of the supporter is, because we want to be 100% accurate of what that is, because it will have an impact and it will be beneficial to play that back to increase conversion, value, and retention. Just because they clicked on the ad doesn't mean they have that identity. We still need to ask. So to sum up, there are 3 steps to using identity insights successfully. First, you need to discover what they are, and we talked about the need to do something, have a different project for this. But once you discover what these are, you need to start capturing and coding it in your database. And again, unfortunately, then there is no shortcut. You need to get that information from your supporters. There is no proxy for it. So you need to ask them every chance you get, just like you're doing with donation asks. With every donation ask for their identity as well. Of course, you will never get 100% coverage with existing supporters, but you can with all new supporters. You just need to include the identity questions in the acquisition process, just like I've shown you with the Facebook ads. And you need to make that field mandatory, just like the credit card details. So once you've done all that, so you know who your supporters are, you've captured their identities, now you can create segments and you can tailor the offers and copy that they receive to play back that identity and reinforce it. Right. If we have a couple of minutes, I'd like to share these two reply form nudges. The first one focuses on the ask arrays. That usually ask arrays focus on previous highest contribution. But in the literature, there is evidence that with active supporters, what is really successful is showing them their average previous gifts. So we tested against this control version, a version that the ask array was based on their average previous gift. And we noticed a 17% increase in response rate and a 13% decrease in average gift. Now, the reduction in average gift makes sense, since in the control condition, we use their highest gift, that's a higher anchor, whereas in the test condition, we use their average gift, which is a lower anchor. But if you have a campaign where you're mostly interested in conversion rates, this might be of interest to test. And the second test, we wanted to see if we could reactivate lapsed supporters. Again, the literature was saying that by mentioning what they gave last, that could be an effective strategy. So against the control reply form, we tested a version where it had an additional row asking people if they would like to contribute what they gave last time. And we also had the gift amount there. And by doing that, we saw an increase in response rate by 12%, a 4% increase in average gift, and a 17% increase in revenue. So that was my presentation. The takeaway message is that by using supporter identity, you can improve performance of any effort, lead generation, retention, repeat gifts, and in any channel. Do get in touch if you want to know how to discover your identities. Thank you.
Are these studies done in the UK?
Some of the studies are done in the UK, some of the studies are done in the US. So the Facebook ads, the majority of them were in the US. Just one example was in the UK. And then for the retention here, this was in the UK, the telemarketing script, but we have done something similar in the US too. So yeah, it's mixed. And I wouldn't expect any different results, but what I always say is test it for yourselves.
And then we have a question. You had said don't accept a proxy for identity, but can personas do the same thing as identities?
No, the personas have nothing to do with identities. Personas are just descriptions of what people are, and maybe they have some attitudinal elements in them, but they certainly don't capture why people give, which is what identity is all about.
Okay.